In the harsh frontier of 1875, Sarah Mitchell stands chained to an ancient oak, abandoned by her own people. The settlers of Fort Richardson had made their judgment. She was a traitor to her race. Her crime? Daring to heal a Kiowa child when others would have let him die. The iron chains bite deep into her wrists as the Texas sun sets, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Wolves begin to circle, their eyes gleaming in the gathering darkness, drawn by the scent of her fear. But something else moves in the shadows, something that will change the course of two peoples forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What happens next will challenge everything both sides believe about mercy, justice, and the power of an unlikely love. 2 days earlier, the morning had dawned crisp and clear over Fort Richardson. Sarah Mitchell's fingers worked methodically, sorting dried herbs in her small cabin at the settlement's edge. The medicine pouch before her, worn leather, stained with years of botanical experiments, held the fruits of last summer's gathering: yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for fever, sage for cleansing. Each plant carried memories of her grandmothers, teachings, whispered lessons passed down through generations of healing women. A pounding at her door shattered the quiet. "Widow Mitchell, come quick!" Young Tommy Barnes, barely 12, stood breathless on her threshold. "It's the trading post. There's trouble." Sarah grabbed her medicine pouch without hesitation. She'd learned long ago that in frontier medicine, minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Following Tommy's lanky frame through the settlement's rutted streets, she could hear the commotion before she saw it. A crowd had gathered outside Jameson's trading post, their faces tight with tension. Through the press of bodies, Sarah caught glimpses of what lay within: a Native American woman cradling a small form, and beside her, 2 stern-faced Kiowa warriors. The child's labored breathing carried clearly in the morning air. "Stand back!" Sheriff Wade Morton's voice cut through the murmur. "These savages have no business here." His hand rested meaningfully on his holster. The Kiowa woman spoke in her native tongue, gesturing desperately at her child. The boy couldn't have been more than 5, his small chest heaving with each struggled breath. Sarah recognized the whistling sound. Croup, most likely, and a bad case at it. "She says the boy is dying," translated old Jim, one of the few settlers who spoke the Kiowa language. "Asks for help. Their medicine man is 3 days' ride away." "Not our problem," Morton spat. "They can take their troubles elsewhere." Sarah pushed forward, her medicine pouch clutched tight. "Sheriff Morton, that child needs help." The crowd parted slightly, faces turning toward her. Sarah felt the weight of their stares, some curious, others disapproving. Since her husband's death 2 years ago, she'd walked a careful line in the settlement, her healing skills tolerated but viewed with suspicion by some who preferred the modern medicine of Fort Worth's doctors. "This isn't your concern, Widow Mitchell," Morton warned. "These Indians have been raiding settlements up and down the Red River. For all we know, this is just a ploy to get inside our defenses." One of the Kiowa warriors stepped forward, his face proud, but his eyes holding genuine concern. He spoke at length, old Jim translating haltingly. "He says they come in peace. The boy took sick 3 days ago. Their summer camp is too far to reach. Their healer in time. They heard tell of a healing woman among the white settlers." The warrior's dark eyes found Sarah's. "They ask for mercy." Sarah met his gaze steadily. In it, she saw not the savage that Morton feared, but a father, desperate to save his son. She thought of her own child, lost to fever before she'd learned enough of her grandmother's healing ways. The memory still burned like a brand upon her heart. "The boy has croup," she said clearly, moving toward the door. "I can help." Morton's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "You set foot in there, you're choosing their side over your own people." Sarah pulled free, her voice steady. "I'm choosing life over death, Sheriff. That's the only side that matters." Inside the trading post, James Jameson had cleared a space near the potbelly stove. The Kiowa woman knelt there, still cradling her son. Up close, Sarah could see the blue tinge to the boy's lips, hear the desperate struggle for each breath. Working. Quickly, Sarah opened her medicine pouch. The familiar scents of dried herbs rose up. Comforting, certain. She pulled out her precious jar of honey, then selected several herbs. Thyme for its powerful medicine, marshmallow root to soothe. Hot. Water, she ordered, and Jameson scrambled to comply. The Kiowa warriors watched intently as she worked, their hands never far from their weapons. Trust, it seemed, ran thin on both sides. Sarah mixed the herbs with honey, creating a soothing syrup. As she worked, she hummed softly, the same lullaby her grandmother had used when treating sick children. Music, she'd always said, was medicine for the spirit, while herbs healed the body. The boy's mother needed no translation to understand Sarah's gestures. Together, they coaxed the syrup into the child's mouth, one small spoonful at a time. Sarah showed her how to hold him upright, easing his breathing. Then she pulled a small metal kettle from her pouch and added more herbs to the hot water, creating a steam tent with a blanket to help clear his airways. Outside, the crowd's murmuring grew louder. Sarah caught fragments of heated debate. Giving away our secrets. Can't trust them. What if they come back? But inside the trading post, none of that mattered. Time slowed to the rhythm of the child's breathing, gradually easing as the medicines did their work. The blue tinge faded from his lips, color returning to his cheeks. When he finally fell into an easy sleep, his mother's tears of relief needed no translation. The Kiowa warrior who had spoken earlier, the boy's father, Sarah now realized, approached her. He pressed something into her hands, a small pouch of buffalo hide, beautifully beaded. Inside, she found unfamiliar herbs, their scent sharp and promising. He says these are healing plants from their people, old Jim translated. A trade, he says, knowledge for knowledge. Sarah's fingers traced the beadwork, reading the story sewn there in blue and white, a pattern of healing, of wisdom passed down. She recognized the truth in that moment. Medicine knew no boundaries, no sides in the arbitrary lines men drew across the earth. But as she stepped outside, medicine pouch and newly gifted herbs in hand, the severity of her choice became clear. The crowd had grown, and with it, the anger. Sheriff Morton stood with several armed men, their faces hard with judgment. "You've gone too far this time, Widow Mitchell," Morton said. "Trading medicines with savages, sharing our knowledge with the enemy. That's not just poor judgment, that's treason." "Treason!" Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief. "That was a sick child, nothing more. A child who'll grow into a warrior," someone shouted. "One who'll use our own medicines against us." The crowd pressed closer, fear and hatred radiating like heat. Sarah stood her ground, though her heart hammered. She'd known there would be consequences, but surely they would understand. These were God-fearing people, weren't they? Christians who preached mercy and healing. But in their eyes, she saw no Christianity, no mercy, only fear, that poison that turned neighbors into enemies and human beings into savages. "Take her to the oak," Morton commanded. "Let her fate serve as a warning to others who'd betray their own kind." As rough hands seized her arms, Sarah caught a last glimpse of the trading post door. The Kiowa family had slipped away in the chaos, their child saved, but at what cost? Her medicine pouch fell to the dust, herbs scattering like broken promises. Across the ground, they dragged her to the ancient oak that stood at the settlement's edge, a tree that had witnessed centuries of human folly. The chains they used were heavy, meant for horses, not human flesh. Each link carried the weight of their fear, their unwillingness to see beyond the barriers they'd built. As they walked away, leaving her to the coming night, Sarah thought of the beaded pouch, the sharing of healing wisdom. In that brief exchange, she'd seen a glimpse of what could be. Two peoples learning from each other, growing stronger together instead of tearing each other apart. The sun began to set. painting the sky in shades of fire. Sarah tested her bonds, but the chains held fast. Already she could hear the first howls of wolves in the distance, yet as darkness crept across the land, she felt no regret. She had chosen life over death, healing over hatred. Whatever came next, she would face it knowing she had remained true to her healer's oath. The night wind carried the scent of sage, cleansing, purifying. Somewhere out there, a child breathed easily in his mother's arms. For now, that would have to be enough. Running Cloud moved like a shadow through the pre-dawn darkness, his moccasins silent on the dew-dampened earth. The sacred eagle feather in his hair, mark of his status as tribal elder, brushed softly against his neck with each careful step. Ahead, the massive oak tree loomed against the stars, its ancient branches reaching toward heaven like gnarled fingers. He had been watching the settlement since sunset, hidden in the tall grass when they brought the white woman to the tree. Even from a distance, he had recognized the beaded medicine pouch his son had given her, the one containing precious herbs from their people. Little Hawk had told him everything, how the pale healer woman had saved young Wolf, how she had shared her medicine ways without hesitation or fear. The wolf's howls grew closer. Running Cloud touched the knife at his belt, its familiar weight reassuring. By tribal law, he should leave her to her fate. The settlers were not his people, their quarrels not his concern. Yet something deeper than law pulled him forward. The old ways that spoke of honor, of debts that must be repaid. His people had lost so much to the white man's hunger for land. Their hunting grounds shrank with each passing season, their ancient way of life transforming like river water into mist. But this woman had reached across that divide, had seen young Wolf not as an enemy's son, but as a child in need of healing. Running Cloud paused in the tree's shadow, studying her face in the starlight. Despite her bonds, she held herself with indignity. Her eyes were closed, lips moving in what might have been prayer, or perhaps she spoke to the spirits of the plants as their own healers did. "You saved my grandson," he said softly in his own tongue. "Now I must decide if saving you will bring war to my people." Her eyes opened at his voice. There was no fear in them, only a quiet acceptance that reminded him of his late wife, Small Bird, who had been the tribe's healer before fever took her. 3 winters ago. The eagle feather brushed his neck again, a reminder. Among his people, such feathers were more than ornaments. They carried responsibility, wisdom passed down through generations. His grandfather had taught him that true wisdom meant seeing beyond the surface of things, beyond the easy answers that fear and hatred offered. The wolves were closer now. Their howls spoke of hunger, of opportunity. Soon they would grow bold, enough to approach, drawn by the scent of helpless prey. Running Cloud's hand tightened on his knife. The decision balanced like a hawk on the wind, act or withdraw, interfere or allow the settlers' justice to take its course. But was it justice, or was it fear wearing justice's mask? The first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky. Soon, the settlement would stir, and his chance would pass. Running Cloud thought of young Wolf, breathing easily now because this woman had seen past the color of his skin. He thought of Small Bird, who had taught him that healing knew no boundaries. He stepped forward into her line of sight. Her eyes widened slightly, but she made no sound. With swift, sure movements, he began to work on her chains. "Your people have forgotten the old wisdom," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. "They see only with their eyes, not with their hearts. But you remember what they have forgotten." The chains fell away. Already the dawn chorus of birds began, singing the sun up from its slumber. Soon the settlement would wake, and their absence would be discovered. Running Cloud helped her to her feet, noting how she bit back a gasp of pain as blood flowed back into her numbed limbs. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the wilderness. "The path ahead is long, and time grows short." She understood enough to follow him into the shadows of the dying night. Behind them, the ancient oak stood witness, its branches swaying in the dawn wind like arms raised in blessing, or perhaps warning. The day ahead would reveal which it was to be. Dawn painted the grasslands in shades of gold as Sarah stumbled after her rescuer, her legs trembling from hours of standing chained. Each step sent needles of pain through her feet, but she forced herself onward. Behind them, a broken chain link lay in the dust beneath the oak, a small trophy of their defiance. Running Cloud moved with the assured grace of one born to these lands, choosing paths invisible to untrained eyes. Though no words passed between them, his gestures were clear enough. Hurry, be quiet, stay close. Sarah found herself studying his movements, learning to place her feet as he did, avoiding the dry twigs that might betray their passage. The morning air carried sounds from Fort Richardson, the crack of a rifle shot, someone hunting, or perhaps a warning, followed by the distant bark of dogs. They were discovering her absence. Soon the whole settlement would be roused, and the hunt would begin in earnest. "Wait," she whispered, though she knew he likely couldn't understand. Her wrists were raw where the chains had bitten, blood seeping slowly from beneath torn skin. More concerning was the numbness in her fingers, too long without proper circulation. As a healer, she knew the dangers. Running Cloud turned at her voice, his weathered face unreadable, but when he saw her examining her wrists, understanding flickered in his dark eyes. He gestured for her to sit on a fallen log, then knelt to examine her injuries. From a pouch at his belt, he withdrew a small bundle of leaves she recognized. Yarrow, the same herb she used for bleeding. She couldn't help but smile at the commonality. Different peoples, same medicines. He crushed the leaves between his fingers and pressed them gently to her wounds. The sound of horses' hooves carried from the direction of the fort, still distant but growing clearer. Running Cloud's head snapped up, his body tensing like a deer scenting danger, but instead of rushing them onward, he finished treating her wrists, tearing strips from his shirt to bind the herbs in place. "Thank you," Sarah said, touching the makeshift bandages. "For this, and for—" She gestured back toward the oak tree. Though he might not understand her words, she needed to speak them. He nodded once, then pointed to himself. "Running Cloud, Sarah," she replied, touching her chest. A shout echoed across the prairie, closer now. Running Cloud gripped her arm, urging her up. They had tarried too long. As they started moving again, Sarah heard Sheriff Morton's voice, carrying on the wind. The savage took her north, cut them off at the river, but Running Cloud was already leading them west, away from the river crossing the posse would expect them to take. Sarah realized he must have been watching the settlement for some time, learning their patterns, their assumptions. Now that knowledge might save their lives. They pushed through tall grass that concealed their passage, crossed shallow streams that would hide their scent from tracking dogs. Every so often, Running Cloud would stop, listening intently to sounds. Sarah could barely hear, then adjust their course accordingly. The sun climbed higher, its heat building. Sarah's legs burned with fatigue, her throat parched, but she refused to slow their pace. The alternative, recapture, and whatever punishment the settlement would devise, was unthinkable. Near midday they crested a small rise, and Sarah gasped. Below them stretched a maze of ravines and rock formations, the Broken Lands, as the settlers called them, a place of legends and warnings, where entire hunting parties had vanished without trace. Running Cloud pointed to a narrow gap between towering rocks, then held up his hand in a gesture that clearly meant wait. He disappeared into the shadows of the formation, leaving Sarah alone with her pounding heart and straining ears. Minutes stretched like hours. The sound of distant horses came again, accompanied by men's voices. Sarah pressed herself flat in the grass, praying she was invisible from below. A rattlesnake slithered past inches from her face, its scales brushing dried grass. She held her breath, remembering her grandmother's teaching, respect the snake's path, and it will respect yours. Running Cloud's return was as silent as his departure. He beckoned urgently, and Sarah followed him into the rock passage. Inside, the air was cool and damp, the walls pressing close on either side. They emerged into a small box canyon, invisible from above or below, where a quiet spring bubbled. From the rock face, Sarah fell to her knees beside the water, drinking deeply. When she finally looked up, she found Running Cloud watching her with an expression that might have been approval. He pointed to her bandaged wrists, then to the spring, and Sarah understood. The cool water would help with the swelling. As she bathed her injuries, distant voices echoed off the canyon walls. The posse, forced to dismount to search the difficult terrain. But in this hidden sanctuary, Sarah felt her fear beginning to fade. She looked at her rescuer, who sat calmly sharpening his knife, and knew that whatever came next, there would be no returning to her old life. The broken chains that had bound her to that oak tree had shattered more than iron. They had broken her bonds to a community that chose fear over compassion, hatred over healing. Now she was free to choose a different path, no matter where it might lead. In the fading light of day, Sarah studied the torn map fragment Running Cloud had spread on a flat rock. Though weathered and incomplete, she could make out enough landmarks to understand their situation. They were deep in contested territory where neither settler nor Kiowa could claim true dominion. The map's edges were burnt, as if it had been rescued from fire, much like Sarah herself had been rescued from death. They had waited out the hottest hours in the box canyon, listening as the sounds of pursuit grew distant, then faded entirely. Now, with evening approaching, Running Cloud indicated they should move again. He traced a path on the map with one weathered finger. Through the broken lands, past Three Sisters Peaks, then into the vast prairie beyond. Sarah's feet had blistered in her inappropriate shoes, but she said nothing as they began their journey anew. The terrain was treacherous, loose scree that shifted underfoot, narrow ledges that required careful navigation. Running Cloud moved with the same fluid grace he had shown earlier, but now he frequently paused to ensure she could follow safely. When Sarah stumbled on a particularly steep descent, he caught her arm, steadying her. The touch was brief but telling. He was committing himself to more than just her rescue. He was taking responsibility for her survival. They made camp as darkness fell, choosing a shallow cave that offered protection from the wind and concealment from searching eyes. Running Cloud built a small fire, shielding its light carefully. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rock walls, reminiscent of the ancient pictographs Sarah had once seen in these lands. From his pack, Running Cloud produced dried meat and some kind of bread. He offered them to Sarah first, a courtesy that touched her deeply. They ate in silence, but it was a comfortable one, born of shared experience rather than awkwardness. After the meal, Running Cloud unfolded a small leather packet. Inside were herbs Sarah recognized. Yarrow again, but also echinacea and what looked like wild oregano. He gestured to her wrists, indicating it was time to change the bandages. As he worked, Sarah found herself studying his face in the firelight. The years had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth, but they were kind lines, speaking of wisdom rather than bitterness. His hands, though calloused from a lifetime of survival, were gentle as they cleaned her wounds. A wolf howled in the distance, answered by its pack. Running Cloud's head lifted, listening intently. He spoke soft words in his own language, seeming to take comfort from the wild song. Sarah remembered stories she'd heard of the Kiowa's relationship with wolves, not as enemies to be feared, but as fellow hunters worthy of respect. Sleep proved elusive despite her exhaustion. Sarah's mind churned with questions about their destination, their chances of success. As if sensing her unrest, Running Cloud began to hum softly, a melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself, ancient and soothing. Dawn broke cold and clear. They ate quickly and continued their journey, now moving through terrain that grew gradually less rocky and more open. The vastness of the prairie stretched before them, a sea of grass rippling in the morning wind. Running Cloud stopped, suddenly dropping into a crouch. Sarah followed suit, though she wasn't sure why until she saw what had caught his attention, a group of pronghorn antelope grazing in the distance. But Running Cloud wasn't watching the animals. His gaze was fixed on something else. Dust on the horizon. Riders. They retreated to a cluster of rocks, Running Cloud pulling the map out once more. His expression was grave as he pointed to their position, then to a series of small X marks he drew in the dust. Sarah understood. There were search parties ahead of them, behind them, and to the north. Their options were narrowing. Running Cloud sketched a new route, one that would take them deep into territory Sarah had always been warned about, the maze-like canyons that the settlers called the Devil's Playground. The Kiowa name for it, she would later learn, translated to Place of Echoing Shadows. As they changed direction, Sarah caught glimpses of Running Cloud studying her, measuring her strength, her resolve. She straightened her spine despite her fatigue, determined to prove herself equal to whatever challenges lay ahead. He nodded slightly, approval flickering in his dark eyes. They walked through the heat of the day, stopping only briefly to drink from a spring Running Cloud, unerringly. Found. Sarah marveled at his ability to read the landscape, the slight changes in vegetation that indicated water, the paths worn by game that offered the easiest passage. Late afternoon brought them to the entrance of the canyon system. Towering walls of striated rock rose on either side, layers of red and gold, telling a story millions of years old. The air grew cooler as they entered the shadows, carrying echoes of water somewhere in the depths. Running Cloud moved more cautiously now, often stopping to listen. These canyons, Sarah realized, could be either sanctuary or trap. The same passages that offered them hiding places could also corner them if the pursuit caught up. As if reading her thoughts, Running Cloud touched her arm and pointed to faint marks on the canyon wall. Symbols Sarah didn't recognize, but clearly meaningful to him. He was following trails known only to his people, paths preserved in secret knowledge passed down through generations. They made camp earlier than the previous night, in a hollow protected by a massive fallen boulder. As Running Cloud tended her wrists again, Sarah noticed his own hands were scraped and bleeding from their climb. Without thinking, she reached for his medicine pouch, gesturing that she wanted to help him as he had helped her. He hesitated only briefly before allowing it. As Sarah applied the healing herbs to his injuries, she felt a shift in their relationship, from rescuer and rescued to something more like partners. They were in this together now, each bringing their own knowledge and strength to their survival. The stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky above their canyon, bright and fierce in the clear air. Sarah thought of the settlement, of the small cabin that had been her home. Strange to think that just 2 days ago, her world had been so confined, so defined by others' expectations and fears. Now she was here, under these infinite stars, with a man who should have been her enemy, but instead had become something else entirely, a bridge between worlds, a promise that perhaps there was another way to live than the path of hatred and fear she had left behind. The torn map lay between them, its incomplete edges a reminder of how much remained unknown. But as sleep finally found her, Sarah felt an unfamiliar sensation, not just hope, but possibility, as vast and wild as the land stretching around them. Morning light filtered through the canyon walls, painting them in shades of amber and rose. Sarah woke to find Running Cloud already alert, examining a small leather-bound journal he had pulled from his pack. When he noticed her watching, he held it out to her. The journal's pages were yellowed with age, the handwriting careful and precise. Sarah recognized it as her own mother's hand, though she hadn't seen it in over 20 years. Her fingers trembled as she took the book. "Where did you—" Her voice trailed off as she opened to the first page. dated 1855. Running Cloud spoke softly, in his language, then pointed to himself, much younger, in a detailed sketch on one of the pages. Next to it was a description of a Kiowa healing ceremony, documented with both scientific precision and deep respect. Sarah's mother had been more than just the quiet settler's wife she'd pretended to be. She had been a scholar of native medicine, working in secret to preserve knowledge that both sides were in danger of losing. Memories surfaced. Her mother's mysterious absences explained away as visits to distant relatives, the strange herbs that appeared in their garden, the nights she would write by candlelight, hiding her work when anyone approached. Running Cloud pointed to another sketch, this one of a woman with kind eyes and long dark hair. The name beneath read, "Morning Star, Kiowa Medicine Woman." He touched his chest, then made a cradling motion. His mother. Sarah's mind reeled at the connection. Their mothers had worked together, bridging cultures long before she and Running Cloud had met. She turned the pages carefully, finding detailed records of plants, ceremonies, and healing wisdom from both traditions. A pressed flower fell from between the pages, prairie smoke, her mother's favorite. Sarah remembered her last words. "There are many ways to heal, daughter. Don't let anyone tell you there's only one path to wisdom." She had died shortly after, taking her secrets with her. Or so Sarah had thought. But here they were, preserved. In this journal that had somehow found its way to Running Cloud, he reached into the journal and withdrew a folded paper, offering it to her. It was a letter written in her mother's hand, dated just before her death. "To whoever finds this journal, these medicines belong to no one people. They are gifts from the earth itself, meant to heal all who walk upon it. I have worked with my dear friend Morning Star to preserve what we could, hoping that someday others would understand what we learned, that wisdom knows no boundaries, and that healing can build bridges where hatred has dug chasms. My daughter Sarah has the gift. I see it in the way she tends the sick, in how she listens to the plants themselves. I pray she will find this knowledge when she's ready, when the world is ready, with hope for the future. Rebecca Mitchell." Sarah looked up to find Running Cloud watching her intently. He had known, she realized, had been waiting for the right moment to share this truth that connected them across decades of conflict. The sound of distant hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Their moment of revelation was cut short by the reality of pursuit. Quickly but carefully, Sarah returned the journal to Running Cloud's pack. As they prepared to move on, she touched the rough canyon wall, thinking of her mother and Morning Star, two women who had dared to reach across the divisions of their time. Their courage lived on in this journal, in the healing knowledge they had fought to preserve. Sarah straightened her shoulders, new strength flowing through her. She was not just running from persecution now, she was running towards something, toward a truth that her mother had seen, that Running Cloud's people had never forgotten, that the greatest medicine of all was the wisdom to see past fear, to the humanity that united them all. The storm came without warning, turning the afternoon sky from clear blue to threatening purple in mere minutes. Running Cloud grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. Thunder cracked overhead, the sound amplified by the rock walls until it seemed to shake the earth itself. They squeezed through the opening just as the first heavy drops fell. Inside, the space widened into a small cave, its walls marked by the same ancient symbols they'd been following. Near the entrance, a lightning-struck tree lay fallen, its wood bleached white by sun and time. Running Cloud quickly gathered some of the dry wood, building a small fire near the cave's mouth. The warmth was welcome. The temperature had dropped dramatically with the storm's arrival. Sarah huddled close to the flames, watching sheets of rain transform the canyon into a network of waterfalls. "Bad medicine," Running Cloud said in careful English, surprising her. It was the first time he had spoken her language. He pointed to the sky, then made a spinning motion with his finger. "Big storm, must wait." Sarah nodded, understanding. Flash floods in these canyons could be deadly. Already she could see water beginning to flow along the canyon floor below their shelter. A massive lightning bolt split the sky, illuminating the cave in stark white. In that brief flash, Sarah saw more detailed pictographs deeper in the cave. Figures dancing, hunting, healing. Among them was a symbol she recognized from her mother's journal. The mark of Morning Star, Running Cloud's mother. Your mother. She began, pointing to the symbol. She came here. Running Cloud's face softened at the mention of his mother. He nodded, then spoke slowly, choosing his English words with care. Many moons ago, with your mother, they come here to... He gestured to the pictographs, searching for the word. To learn, to teach. The storm raged outside, but in their small sanctuary, a different kind of energy built. Running Cloud reached into his pack and withdrew her mother's journal again. This time he turned to a specific page, showing her a detailed drawing of this very cave. Medicine place, he explained. Old ones left wisdom here. Your mother, my mother, they understand. Some places hold power, hold truth. Sarah studied the journal entry. Her mother had documented several healing rituals performed in this cave, combining Kiowa ceremonies with European herbal knowledge. The sketches showed Morning Star and her mother working together, creating medicines that drew from both traditions. Another lightning strike illuminated the cave, followed immediately by deafening thunder. The storm was directly overhead now. Running Cloud added more wood to their fire, then sat beside Sarah, their shoulders almost touching. I had a wife, he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the storm. Small bird. She was healer. Like my mother, like you. He touched his chest, where Sarah noticed for the first time a small beaded pouch hanging beneath his shirt. Fever took her. 3 winters passed. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. Then, finding courage in his openness, I lost my husband, Thomas, 2 years ago. Bullet meant for someone else. They sat in silence for a moment, each absorbed in their memories. Then Running Cloud spoke again, his voice stronger. Small bird say same as your mother. Medicine not belong to one people, belong to earth, to life. Sarah thought of the child she had saved, of Running Cloud's grandson breathing easily in his mother's arms. She thought of all the artificial boundaries humans created, the walls of fear and hatred that kept them apart. The settlers, she said, they're afraid. They see your people as threats, not as... She struggled to find the right words. Not as people, Running Cloud finished. Same with my people. See settlers as enemies only. Forget we all bleed same. In blood, all need same healing. The storm's fury began to ease, the thunder growing more distant. But neither of them moved. In the firelight, Sarah studied Running Cloud's profile, the strength in his features, the wisdom in his eyes. He turned to meet her gaze, and something passed between them, something that transcended language and culture. My mother's message. Right, Running Cloud said, touching the journal. Time come for new way. Old hatred must die like lightning tree. He gestured to the fallen wood that now gave them warmth and light. New life grow from old death. Outside, the rain softened to a gentle shower. The first ray of sun broke through the clouds, creating a rainbow that arced across the canyon. Sarah thought of how this cave had sheltered 2 women decades ago as they worked to preserve healing wisdom. Now it had sheltered their children, carrying forward that legacy of understanding and hope. The storm had delayed their journey, but Sarah felt it had also given them something valuable, a deeper understanding of their shared purpose. They weren't just running from the past anymore. They were running toward a future that their mothers had dared to imagine, one where healing could bridge the deepest divides. The Kiowa summer camp spread across the valley like scattered leaves, each teepee a story written on the land. Sarah and Running Cloud approached as the sun began to set, their shadows stretching long before them. A peace pipe, its stem adorned with eagle feathers and intricate beadwork, hung prominently outside the central council teepee, signifying ongoing deliberations within, Children playing at the camp's edge spotted them first. Their shouts brought others running, including young Wolf, the boy Sarah had healed. He broke away from his mother's grasp and ran to them, touching Sarah's hand with wondering fingers, as if making sure she was real. Running Cloud spoke rapidly in Kiowa, explaining their presence to the gathering crowd. Sarah heard her name mentioned, followed by Medicine Woman in their tongue. The boy's mother stepped forward, pressing her forehead to Sarah's in a gesture of deep gratitude, but not all faces showed welcome. Warriors gathered at the edges of the crowd, their expressions hard. One stepped forward, tall, proud, with a bear claw necklace marking him as a person of importance. "Black Bear speaks for many," Running Cloud murmured to Sarah. "He say bringing white woman here bring danger to people." The warrior, Black Bear, addressed the crowd, his voice carrying authority. Though Sarah couldn't understand his words, she recognized the tone of someone building a case against her presence. More warriors nodded in agreement. From the council, Itipi emerged, an elderly woman, her silver hair braided with medicine bundles. Her face bore the same strength as Running Cloud's, tempered by years of wisdom. She carried herself with quiet authority, and the crowd parted before her. "My sister," Running Cloud explained. "Grey Dove, she lead council since our father die." Grey Dove studied Sarah with penetrating eyes, then spoke to her brother. Their exchange was intense but measured, like a dance of words where each step carried weight. "Come," Running Cloud said to Sarah. "Council must hear our story." Inside, the council teepee. The air was thick with pipe smoke and tension. Tribal elders sat in a circle, their faces illuminated by the central fire. Grey Dove took her place among them, gesturing for Running Cloud and Sarah to sit. Running Cloud removed their mother's journal from his pack, holding it reverently. As he spoke, he turned pages, showing the elders the detailed records of his mother's work with Sarah's mother. The peace pipe was passed, and when it came to Sarah, she accepted it with proper ceremony, remembering the protocol described in her mother's writings. Black Bear spoke again, his words causing stirs of agreement among some council members. Running Cloud translated in whispers, "He say settlers already looking for you. Say your presence put tribe in danger. Say you should be sent away or given back to your people." Young Wolf's mother rose then, speaking passionately. She described Sarah's healing of her son, how she had shared her medicine freely and without fear. Others joined in, some supporting Sarah's presence, others warning of the dangers she brought with her. Grey Dove listened to all sides, her face unreadable. Finally, she raised her hand for silence. Her words, when they came, carried the weight of mountains. "My sister say you carry our mother's spirit," Running Cloud translated. "Say medicine know no boundaries." But he paused as Grey Dove continued, "Council must think of people's safety, must find way to protect both wisdom and tribe." The debate continued as the sun set and stars emerged. Sarah found herself studying the faces around her, seeing not the savages of settler tales, but people wrestling with the same fears and hopes she knew from her own community. They were trying to protect their way of life, their children's future, just as the settlers claimed to be doing. A commotion outside interrupted the council. A scout burst in, speaking urgently. The atmosphere in the teepee changed instantly, tension crackling like lightning. "Soldiers," Running Cloud whispered to Sarah, "moving north, many horses." Black Bear stood, his bearing now that of a war chief rather than a council member. His proposal was clear even without translation. The tribe must move immediately to their winter camping grounds. Grey Dove raised her hand again. When she spoke, her eyes rested on Sarah with peculiar intensity. Running Cloud translated, "My sister say you have choice. Can go with tribe to winter grounds, learn our ways, share your healing wisdom. Or we take you to trading post near Mexican border, give you new start far from those who hunt you." Sarah looked around the council circle. She saw fear in some faces, hope in others. She thought of her mother's words in the journal. Wisdom knows no boundaries. She thought of Running Cloud, of the understanding that had grown between them. Black Bear added something else, his tone challenging. Running Cloud hesitated before translating. He say, "If you choose to come with tribe, you must prove loyalty, must learn our ways, become one of people, no more living in two worlds." The peace pipe had come around again. As Sarah held it, she felt the weight of history in her hands. How many councils had this same pipe seen? How many decisions that shaped the lives of generations? She thought of Fort Richardson, of the chains that had bound her to that oak tree. She thought of her mother and Morning Star, two women who had dared to believe in a different way. She thought of young Wolf, healing under her care, and of all the children, both settler and Kiowa, who deserved a future not poisoned by hatred. Sarah took a deep breath and spoke, not in English, but in the few Kiowa words she had learned. From her mother's journal, "I choose to stay, to learn, to heal." The words were simple, probably poorly pronounced, but their effect was electric. Grey Dove smiled for the first time, a smile that transformed her stern face into one of surprising youth. Even Black Bear nodded, a gesture of respect if not full acceptance. Running Cloud touched Sarah's arm lightly, and in his eyes she saw pride, understanding, and something more. Something that made her heart beat faster despite the gravity of the moment. Outside, the camp was already preparing to move, a well-practiced ritual of survival. As they emerged from the council tipi, the peace pipe was being carefully wrapped for the journey ahead. Sarah watched its eagle feathers flutter in the night wind, carrying prayers for wisdom, for safety, and perhaps for a new kind of healing that could bridge the oldest of divides. The Scout's military badge, taken from a fallen cavalry soldier, lay heavy in Running Cloud's palm as he delivered the news. Sarah watched the tribal council's faces grow grave as he spoke. Though she had begun learning their language, she caught only fragments. Many soldiers, big guns, moving fast. Grey Dove turned to Sarah, speaking in careful English she had not revealed before. "Your Sheriff Morton, he tell Fort Richardson you kidnapped by savages. Tell them we plan raid on settlement." Her eyes held Sarah's steadily. "He make lie to bring soldiers, to have excuse." Sarah's stomach churned. She had known Morton was a hard man, but this level of manipulation shocked her. "How many soldiers?" she asked. "2 companies," Running Cloud answered. "Maybe 100 men, with mountain howitzers." Black Bear spoke sharply from his position by the fire. Grey Dove nodded at his words. "He say you bring this danger, say you must go." But Sarah saw something else in Grey Dove's expression, a deeper concern. "There's more, isn't there?" the old woman sighed. "Black Bear speaks some truth. But soldiers come anyway, sooner or later. They want our land, with or without excuse." She touched the badge in Running Cloud's hand. "This soldier die 3 days ago. Scouts say he carry orders. Fort Richardson get new commander next month. Man who burned 3 villages on plains last summer." Sarah remembered fragments of newspaper. Stories about those burnings. The settlers had celebrated them as victories. Now she wondered how many children like young Wolf had died in those fires. "How long?" Running Cloud asked his sister. "To reach winter camps. 4 days if we push hard." "Soldiers?" Grey Dove shook her head. 2 days, maybe less." Black Bear spoke again, forcefully. This time Sarah understood enough to grasp his meaning. Split the tribe. Warriors to delay soldiers, others to run. No. The word burst from her before she could stop it. All eyes turned to her. Drawing a deep breath, Sarah continued, "That's what they want. To split you up, to force you to fight." She turned to Grey Dove. "I've treated soldiers at the fort. They fear what they don't understand. But if we could make them understand." "What?" Black Bear cut in, his English harsh but clear. "Understand we are animals, that our children deserve to die." "No," Sarah said softly. "Understand that you are people, that there can be another way." She reached for her mother's journal, which she now carried. Our mothers believed this. They found a way to share wisdom, to heal together. Grey Dove was silent for a long moment. Finally she spoke. "Pretty words, but will not stop bullets." "Then let me go to them," Sarah said. "I'll tell them the truth about Morton's lies." "They shoot you as traitor," Running Cloud protested. "Maybe." Sarah met his eyes. "But if we don't try to stop this cycle of hatred, who will?" The council chamber fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Outside, they could hear the camp preparing to move, the sounds of a people who had grown too used to running. Grey Dove studied Sarah's face for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched the journal. Our mothers were brave women, foolish perhaps, but brave. She turned to Black Bear. What if wisdom stronger than bullets? What if healing better than killing? Black Bear's expression remained stern, but something flickered in his eyes. He spoke briefly in Kiowa. "He say you prove loyalty," Running Cloud translated. "But how you stop 100 soldiers?" Sarah thought of the fort, of the men she had tended there, of their fears, their prejudices, but also their humanity. "Not with guns," she said, "with truth, with healing." She touched the journal. "With the wisdom our mothers preserved." Grey Dove nodded slowly. "Then we not run, not yet." She rose, her authority filling the lodge. "We make medicine, strong medicine, medicine of truth." As the council dispersed to oversee the camp's preparation, Sarah caught Running Cloud's eye. His face showed both fear and pride. "Strong medicine," he said softly, "but cost may be high." Sarah touched the badge, still warm from his hand. "Some prices must be paid," she answered, "if we want the healing to begin." Dawn found Sarah working alongside Swift Deer, the tribe's medicine woman, in a tipi filled with healing herbs. Their hands moved in parallel, Swift Deer grinding sacred red willow bark, while Sarah prepared a poultice of yarrow and comfrey. Between them lay a bundle of healing herbs, their combined knowledge made physical. "Your way, our way, same heart," Swift Deer said in halting English, touching her chest. She picked up a sprig of sage, demonstrated how she used it for purification. Sarah showed her how settlers use the same plant to treat throat ailments. They smiled at the connection, at wisdom shared across boundaries. Young Wolf sat nearby, watching intently as they worked. His breathing was clear now, no trace of the croup that had started this journey. Other children had begun gathering at the teepee's entrance, drawn by curiosity about the white medicine woman. Swift Deer encouraged them to enter, to learn. Sarah taught them to identify healing plants, while Swift Deer explained the spiritual significance of each one. The children's quick minds bridged the language gap, translating eagerly between the two healers. Their laughter filled the teepee, a medicine of its own. Running Cloud entered, carrying fresh herbs from the morning's gathering. He paused at the sight before him. Sarah, surrounded by Kiowa children, learning their words for plants while teaching them her own knowledge. Their eyes met, and his smile carried a warmth that made her breath catch. "Grey Dove asks for you both," he said. "Scouts. Report soldiers closer than expected." The children were shooed away as Sarah and Swift Deer gathered their medicines. Outside, the camp was a flurry of activity. Warriors prepared horses while women packed essential items. But it wasn't the chaotic evacuation of previous days. This time, they were preparing for a stand. In the council teepee, Grey Dove sat with Black Bear and other tribal leaders. A map drawn in the dirt showed the soldiers' approach. Sarah studied it, remembering the terrain from her own journey. "They follow river," Black Bear said. "Two groups, here and here." He marked positions with stones. "The southern group will reach this valley by nightfall," Running Cloud added. "Good place for camp. They rest horses there." Sarah nodded. "That's Captain Harrison's favorite stopping point. He's a cautious man, won't push his horses too hard." She had treated the captain's wounds once, knew his methodical nature. Swift Deer laid out the medicines they had prepared. She spoke at length in Kiowa, Grey Dove translating, "She say we make strong healing medicine. Medicine to open eyes, open hearts, but must be used right way, right time. Like treating fever," Sarah said. "Too soon or too late, medicine loses power." Black Bear looked skeptical but listened as they outlined their plan. It was risky, dependent on timing and trust. But as Grey Dove had said, perhaps wisdom could prove stronger than bullets. They worked through the day, preparing. Swift Deer taught Sarah the sacred songs that would accompany their medicine, while Sarah shared her knowledge of the soldiers' ways and weaknesses. The two traditions began to merge, creating something new. Young Wolf and the other children were sent to gather specific flowers, bright blooms that would play their part in the plan. The women of the tribe added their own skills, weaving and decorating with purpose. Even Black Bear's warriors contributed, their knowledge of the land essential to what would come. As sunset approached, Sarah sat with Running Cloud outside the medicine teepee. He was cleaning his knife, not for fighting, but for cutting herbs. The transformation struck her as significant. "Your mother would be proud," she said softly. "Both our mothers would be." He nodded, touching the journal where it lay between them. "They see far, those two women. See time like this coming." He met her eyes. "See need for new way. If we succeed," Sarah began. "When we succeed," he corrected gently. "When we succeed," she smiled. "What then?" Running Cloud was silent for a moment, his hand finding hers in the gathering dusk. "Then we build new medicine, medicine strong enough to heal old wounds, medicine of two peoples becoming one." Behind them, Swift Deer began the evening healing song. Sarah recognized the melody now, could even join in some of the words. The tune carried on the wind toward the river, where soldiers waited, though they didn't know it yet, for their own kind of healing. In the fading light, Sarah watched young Wolf teaching other children the English names for healing plants. The future, she realized, was already growing here, like medicine flowers pushing through hard ground. All they had to do was give it the chance to bloom. A broken arrow lay at Grey Dove's feet, its shaft split cleanly in two. The symbol was unmistakable. Betrayal had come from within. Around the council fire, faces were grim as Swift Deer tended to young Wolf's mother, who lay bleeding from a blow to the head. "Tell them again," Grey Dove commanded. "Every word." The injured woman spoke haltingly, Sarah catching fragments through. Her growing understanding of Kiowa. She had discovered White Fox, a young warrior, meeting secretly with a settler scout. When she confronted him, he struck her and fled. "White Fox knows everything," Running Cloud said, his voice heavy. "Our plans, our medicines, the valley where we wait for soldiers." He looked at Sarah. "Knows about you." Black Bear spat into the fire. "I warned of trust given too freely." "This is not about trust," Grey Dove countered sharply. "White Fox's father died in Trader Massacre last spring. He carries poison in his heart, seeks revenge on all sides." Sarah remembered the massacre. 5 Kiowa warriors killed over a trading dispute. The settlers had celebrated it as justice. She saw now how violence bred violence, revenge spawning revenge in an endless cycle. Running Cloud touched the broken arrow. "White Fox rides to soldiers now. 2 hours, maybe 3, before he reaches them. Then they come tonight," Black Bear said. "Not tomorrow as planned, all medicine preparations ruined." Swift Deer spoke up from where she worked, her hands still moving over her patient. She gestured to the medicines they had prepared, then to Sarah, then made a sweeping motion toward the valley. Sarah understood. "We can still do it. Different way, but same medicine." Grey Dove nodded slowly. "Speak your thought." "White Fox expects us to run, to scatter like before. The soldiers will split up to pursue us, just as they want." Sarah leaned forward, drawing in the dirt. "But what if instead we gather? Bring everyone, children, elders, all the people, to the valley tonight. You would put our families in. A soldier's path." Black Bear's tone was incredulous. "Yes." Sarah met his eyes steadily. because they must see, really see, not just warriors to fight, but people, families, children. Running Cloud caught her meaning. Medicine of truth. The strongest medicine, Sarah agreed. Show them what they fear to see. Their own humanity reflected back at them. Swift Deer added her voice, speaking of old ceremonies where enemies were made into brothers. Grey Dove translated, "She says sometimes greatest healing comes from standing still, facing what pursues you." Black Bear rose, his imposing figure casting long shadows. Pretty words, but if you are wrong, our people die. If we keep running, keep fighting, our people die anyway, Grey Dove responded, just slower. She touched the broken arrow. Violence breaks everything it touches. Perhaps time for new way. The council debated as the moon rose. Sarah watched, their faces, seeing fear wrestle with hope, tradition with necessity. Finally, Grey Dove raised her hand for silence. "We choose medicine path," she announced, "but not blindly." She turned to Black Bear. "Your warriors make circle around valley, hidden. If medicine fails, if soldiers show no heart, you protect our people." The war chief nodded grudgingly. Sarah saw the wisdom in Grey Dove's decision, trust balanced with caution, hope with pragmatism. They moved quickly after that, the camp dissolving into ordered activity. The broken arrow was carefully wrapped and placed with other sacred objects, a reminder, Sarah realized, of this moment of choice. As she helped Swift Deer gather their medicines, Sarah felt Running Cloud's presence before she saw him. He carried something wrapped in soft hide. "My mother's medicine dress," he said quietly. "She wear it when working strongest healing." He held it out to Sarah. "Grey Dove say you wear it tonight." Sarah touched the dress reverently. Intricate beadwork depicted healing plants and sacred symbols, some of which she recognized from her mother's journal. "I'm not worthy," she whispered. "You are." Running Cloud's hand covered hers on the beaded fabric. "You bring new medicine, new way of seeing, like our mothers before us." Their eyes met in the moonlight. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, of choices that would ripple through generations. Running Cloud's hand moved to touch her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. A shout from the edge of camp broke the moment. Swift Deer called urgently for help with her patient. As Sarah turned to respond, Running Cloud caught her arm. "Whatever comes," he said softly in English, "I walk medicine path with you." Sarah clutched the dress to her heart, knowing it was more than just clothing she held. It was history and future combined, a symbol of healing that transcended the boundaries of race and fear. The moon climbed higher as the camp prepared to move. They would reach the valley before the soldiers, make their medicine stand on ground of their choosing. Sarah thought of White Fox, racing through the night, carrying what he thought was victory to the soldiers. But perhaps his betrayal would serve a greater purpose, becoming the catalyst for change that both peoples desperately needed. "Your mother once wrote that the strongest healing comes from the deepest wounds," Grey Dove said, appearing beside her. "Tonight, we test wisdom of those words." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the medicine dress in her arms, the weight of trust and hope and possibility. Behind them, young Wolf had started a healing song, his clear voice rising into the night. One by one, others joined in, a music that spoke of courage, of wisdom, of the power of standing still when everything said to run. The broken arrow had shown them the depth of their divisions. Now it was time to see if medicine truly could prove stronger than fear. The moon cast silver ribbons on the river's surface as the tribe approached the crossing. Sarah, wearing Morningstar's medicine dress, sat in a carved canoe beside Swift Deer. The vessel itself was sacred, its wood etched with healing symbols that seemed to move in the shifting light. Running Cloud and two other warriors guided the canoe through the current. Around them, the tribe crossed in small groups. Children held high above the water, elders supported by strong arms, medicine bundles kept carefully dry. They moved in near silence, even the smallest children understanding the need for quiet. Sarah touched the river's surface, feeling its cool strength. Swift Deer nodded approvingly and did the same, speaking softly in Kiowa. River takes all, gives new beginning. From somewhere downstream came the faint sound of horses, the soldiers making camp just as they had predicted. White Fox would have reached them by now. Sarah imagined the scene. The young warrior spilling his secrets, the soldiers preparing for what they thought would be a simple routing of scattered Indians. The canoe bumped against the far bank. As Running Cloud helped them out, his hand lingered on Sarah's arm. "You feel it?" he asked quietly. She did. There was a charge in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. More than just tension or fear, a sense of forces gathering, of paths converging. The medicine dress seemed to hum against her skin. Swift Deer began to sing softly as she unpacked her medicines on the bank. Other voices joined her, a melody that blended with the river's song. Sarah recognized the words now, a prayer for cleansing, for new vision. Young Wolf appeared at her side, offering a handful of river-wet sage. "For medicine," he said in careful English. Sarah accepted it with formal gravity, teaching him the settler words for the plant's healing properties, while he corrected her pronunciation of its Kiowa name. Black Bear's warriors melted into the darkness, taking up their protective positions around the valley. The war chief himself paused beside Sarah, his face unreadable in the moonlight. "If your medicine fails," he said simply, "my arrows will not." "If medicine fails," Sarah replied in his own tongue, "arrows already failed too many times." A flicker of surprise crossed his stern features, perhaps at her growing command of Kiowa, perhaps at the truth in her words. He touched his chest in a gesture of respect before disappearing into the night. They made their final preparations on the riverbank. Sarah and Swift Deer laid out their medicines according to the old ways, but with new purpose. The river had washed them clean of hesitation, of fear. What remained was pure intention, the determination to heal what had been broken. Grey Dove gathered them for a final council. "Dawn comes soon," she said. "Medicine must be strong to open eyes so long closed." Sarah looked at the faces around her. Running Cloud's quiet strength, Swift Deer's ancient wisdom, Young Wolf's bright hope. She thought of her mother and mourning, Star, of the vision they had shared so long ago. The medicine dress felt warm against her skin, as if their spirits moved within its beaded patterns. "We are ready," she said, and this time she spoke in both languages, bridging worlds as her mother had done before her. The river flowed behind them, carrying away the old, making space for what was to come. Dawn waited just below the horizon, ready to reveal their medicine to those who had forgotten how to see. The valley opened before them like cupped hands, held between ancient mountain walls. Here the ancestors had left their mark. Cave paintings stretched across the rock face, telling stories of hunts, battles, and healing ceremonies. Sarah recognized symbols from her mother's journal, understanding now that she was seeing the source of that shared wisdom. Grey Dove led them to the largest cave, its entrance marked by paintings of spirit animals and healing plants. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the weight of centuries. Swift Deer began setting up their medicines while children gathered dry wood for the sacred fire. "Many winters ago," Running Cloud said, touching one of the paintings. "Great. Medicine made here. Many tribes come together, make peace." His fingers traced a circle of figures holding hands. Enemy become brother. Old hatred washed away. Sarah studied the ancient artwork. The pigments were still vivid: red ochre, yellow clay, black charcoal. She saw how the artists had used the rock's natural contours to give depth to their images. Among the figures, she noticed a recurring symbol, two spirals joined together, becoming one. "The symbol of unity," Grey Dove said, following her gaze. "Old ones say it hold power to open hearts, if used with right medicine, right wisdom." She Touch Sarah's medicine dress. Like this dress, like journal your mother write, all part of same medicine. Outside, Black Bear's scouts reported movement from the soldiers' camp. The cavalry was preparing to mount, their intentions clear in the pre-dawn darkness. White Fox had done his work well. Sarah and Swift Deer worked quickly, preparing their medicines according to both traditions. Young Wolf helped, grinding herbs while learning the prayers that went with each preparation. Other children watched and learned, the future taking shape in their eager minds. Running Cloud brought news from his warriors. Soldiers split up, like you say. Main group come up valley. Others circle around, think to trap us. But we are already where we choose to be, Grey Dove said calmly. She turned to Sarah. Time for your medicine song. Sarah had been practicing the ancient melody that Swift Deer taught her. A song of healing, meant to open minds and hearts. Now, standing in this sacred space, she felt the weight of generations watching. Your mother write of this place. Running, Cloud said softly. She dream of time when medicine of both peoples come together here, make new beginning. He touched her hand. Maybe she see this day. The first light of dawn began to color the eastern sky. From below came the sound of horses and men, the soldiers approaching with the confidence of those who expect an easy victory. Grey Dove gathered everyone in the cave's main chamber. The tribal members arranged themselves according to ancient custom, children and elders in the center, warriors and healers forming a protective circle around them. Sarah and Swift Deer took their places side by side, their medicines laid out before them. Whatever comes, Grey Dove announced in both languages, we stand in wisdom of ancestors, we stand in power of healing. She looked at Sarah. We stand, in hope of new way. Sarah touched the cave paintings, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingers. How many others had stood here before her, seeking wisdom, seeking peace? How many had dared to imagine a different path than hatred and fear? The medicine dress seemed to pulse with energy, or perhaps it was her own heart, beating in time with the ancient rhythms of this place. Running Cloud stood beside her, solid as the mountain itself. In his eyes, she saw not just the present moment, but possibilities stretching far into the future. Young Wolf began the healing song, his clear voice rising to the cave's roof. One by one, others joined in, a harmony of hope built from many voices becoming one. Sarah added her voice, the English words she had learned weaving through the Kiowa verses. Outside, the sound of approaching horses grew louder. The moment of truth was nearly upon them. Sarah thought of her mother's words in the journal. Some medicines heal the body, others heal the heart. The strongest medicine of all heals the divisions between peoples. In the growing light, the cave painting seemed to move, ancient wisdom awakening. The joined spirals pulsed with meaning, separate paths flowing together, becoming something anew, something stronger. Sarah touched the medicine bundle before her, feeling the power of two traditions combined. Whatever happened next would echo through generations, just as the songs in this cave had echoed through time. Dawn was breaking. The time for medicine had come. A white flag fluttered in the dawn breeze as Sarah stepped from the cave's shelter. She had removed the medicine dress, donning instead her simple settler's clothing. The transformation was deliberate. She would bridge these worlds by walking between them. Remember, Grey Dove said softly, soldiers see only what they expect to see. You must make them see truth instead. Sarah nodded, touching the medicine, a pouch hidden in her skirt pocket. Inside were herbs from both traditions, settler and Kiowa wisdom combined. Running Cloud stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. I go with you, he said, but Sarah shook her head. They must see me alone first. A woman they know, not what they fear. She touched his arm. Wait for my signal. Swift Deer approached with a bundle of sage, using the smoke to purify Sarah's path. Young Wolf watched solemnly from the cave entrance, understanding the gravity of the moment, even if he didn't fully grasp its implications. The sound of horses grew closer. Sarah could make out individual voices now, orders being called, weapons being readied. She thought of Captain Harrison, of the time she had tended his wounds, listened to him speak of his family back east. Would he remember her kindness? Would it matter? If they shoot, Black Bear said from the shadows. My warriors will— They won't shoot, Sarah interrupted. Not at first. They'll want to understand. She met his eyes. Understanding is where healing begins. The war chief touched his chest in reluctant respect. Sarah realized how far they had come from his initial hostility. Change was possible. She had seen it happen here, in this sacred place. Grey Dove pressed something into Sarah's hand. A small, white stone carved with the spiral symbol from the cave walls. Medicine of truth, she said. Strong medicine. Sarah squeezed the stone, feeling its smooth comfort. Then, carrying only the white flag and the hidden medicines, she began her descent into the valley. Behind her, the tribe began a soft healing song, not a war chant, but a prayer for open hearts and clear vision. The first rays of sun broke over the mountain just as she reached the valley floor. She could see the soldiers clearly now, their blue uniforms stark against the landscape. Captain Harrison sat his horse at their head, his face unreadable at this distance. Sarah walked steadily forward, the white flag moving gently in the morning. Breeze. She felt the weight of two people's hopes riding on her shoulders, but also a deeper certainty that her mother and Morning Star had seen this moment coming, had prepared the way through their shared wisdom. The time for running is past, she whispered to herself. The time for healing has come. The soldiers raised their weapons, but didn't fire. Sarah kept walking, her steps measured, deliberate. She was close enough now to see the confusion on their faces. This was not the violent confrontation they had expected. Captain Harrison's voice carried clearly across the diminishing space. "Hold your fire! That's Sarah Mitchell." Sarah smiled inwardly. The first step of the medicine was working. They were seeing her as a person they knew, not as an enemy. Now she had to help them see the Kiowa people the same way. She stopped at a respectful distance, lowered the white flag, and spoke in a clear, carrying voice. "Captain Harrison, I've come to tell you a story about healing." The sun climbed higher, painting the valley in shades of gold. Behind her, the healing song continued, a gentle reminder that there was another way, if they were brave enough to take it. Sheriff Morton's voice cut through the morning air like a whip. "She's been bewitched by those savages. Don't listen to her lies." He had ridden up behind the soldiers' line, his face twisted with the same hatred that had chained Sarah to the oak tree. But Captain Harrison remained steady on his horse, studying Sarah with careful eyes. "You were reported kidnapped, Mrs. Mitchell," the captain said evenly. "Taken by force. The only force used against me was by my own people." Sarah's voice carried clearly across the space between them. "The Kiowa saved my life after Morton condemned me for the crime of healing a sick child." Morton spurred his horse forward. "She admits to helping them, to sharing our medicines with the enemy." "Enemy?" Sarah opened her medicine pouch, letting the herbs spill into her palm. "Captain Harrison, you remember when I treated your wound last winter? This is the same yarrow I used then." She held up another herb. "And this is its Kiowa cousin, given to me by their healer. They work the same way, these plants. They don't care what color hand picks them." A murmur went through the soldiers. Sarah saw confusion replacing certainty on some faces. She pressed. "Her advantage. You were told you'd find a war party here. Instead, you've found families, mothers, children, elders." She gestured toward the cave. "Come see for yourself." "It's a trap!" Morton shouted, but Captain Harrison raised his hand for silence. "Why are you here, Mrs. Mitchell?" "Really here?" Sarah touched the white stone in her pocket, drawing strength from its ancient wisdom. "To show you what my mother and a Kiowa medicine woman discovered 20 years ago, that healing is stronger than hatred, that understanding can bridge any divide." From the cave came young Wolf's clear voice, starting the healing song. Other voices joined in, the melody floating across the valley like morning mist. Sarah saw the soldiers shifting in their saddles, weapons lowering slightly as they recognized the sound not of war, but of prayer. "Captain," Sarah continued, "you have a choice. You can believe Morton's lies about savages and raids, or you can see the truth, that the Kiowa are people just like us. People who heal their sick, love their children, pray to their God." She turned to the cave entrance and raised her hand. Running Cloud emerged, followed by Grey Dove and Swift Deer. They carried no weapons, only medicine bundles. Behind them came Young Wolf and the other children, still singing. Several soldiers raised their rifles, but Harrison barked, "Hold your fire." "Look at them," Sarah urged. "Really look. These are the people Morton would have you kill. For what? Because they dare to live differently than we do? Because they know medicines we could learn from if we weren't too proud to listen?" Morton drew his pistol. "Enough of this nonsense." But before he could aim, Captain Harrison's voice rang out, "Sheriff Morton, stand down or my men will disarm you." The sheriff's face purpled with rage, but he lowered his weapon. Sarah saw the balance of power shifting, medicine doing its work. "Mrs. Mitchell," Harrison said quietly, "you say there's something we should see?" Sarah nodded. "Let me show you what my mother discovered, what the Kiowa have known all along." She gestured to the cave. "Let me show you a different way." The captain considered for a long moment, then dismounted. "Lieutenant, keep the men here. I'm going to hear her out." "Sir," Morton protested, but Harrison silenced him with a look. "I've known Sarah Mitchell for 3 years, trusted her to tend my wounds and those of my men. If she says there's something we need to see, we'll see it." As the captain walked toward her, Sarah felt the rightness of the moment. This was what her mother and Morning Star had worked toward, not just healing bodies, but healing the rifts between peoples. The white stone felt warm in her pocket, thrumming with the power of ancient wisdom, meeting present courage. Behind her, the healing song continued, calling them all toward a future where understanding might finally prove stronger than fear. Inside the cave, Swift Deer spread a ceremonial blanket before the ancient paintings. This was no ordinary trading blanket, but a wedding blanket, its patterns telling stories of unions between peoples long ago. Sarah recognized some of the symbols from her mother's journal, the joining of different medicines, different ways of healing. Captain Harrison stood silent, taking in the cave paintings, the peaceful gathering of families, the medicines laid out with such care. His hand had fallen away from his weapon entirely. "Your mother wrote of this place," he said finally, surprising Sarah. "Articles in medical journals before the war. I remember reading them." He touched one of the paintings. "Ooh." She argued for preserving native healing knowledge, said we had more to learn than teach. "You knew my mother's work?" "Many did, before fear made us forget wisdom." He turned to face her. "Sheriff Morton knew too. That's why he feared you so much." "You were proving her right." Grey Dove stepped forward, speaking in careful English. "Your captain speaks truth. Fear make people forget, but medicine help remember." Young Wolf approached with a cup of herb tea prepared by Swift Deer. He offered it first to Harrison, then to Sarah, then took some to the cave entrance for the soldiers outside. The ritual sharing of medicine had begun. Running Cloud stood beside Sarah, their shoulders touching. The contact was subtle but clear, a declaration of unity that didn't need words. Harrison noted it with raised eyebrows, but said nothing. "Your mother dreamed of this," Running Cloud said softly. "Both mothers dream of people healing together." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. They saw so far ahead. Swift Deer began to sing, her voice strong and sure. To Sarah's amazement, Harrison joined in. The words unfamiliar, but the melody true. He caught her surprised look and smiled slightly. 20 years serving the frontier, Mrs. Mitchell. You learn things if you keep your heart open." More soldiers had dismounted, drawn by Young Wolf's fearless offering of tea. Even Morton sat alone on his horse, his anger turning to confusion as he watched his men sharing drinks with savages. Blackbear emerged from the shadows, his weapons conspicuously absent. He spoke to Grey Dove, who translated, He say maybe old one's right. Maybe medicine stronger than arrows. The wedding blanket seemed to glow in the morning light that reached into the cave. Sarah felt Running Cloud's hand find hers, saw Harrison notice and nod slightly. There will be those who oppose this, the captain said, who won't want to understand. Yes, Sarah agreed, but there will also be those who remember what my mother knew, that healing can bridge any divide if we're brave enough to try. Gray, Dove touched the wedding blanket. 2 streams join, make stronger river. 2 medicines join, make stronger healing. She looked at Running Cloud and Sarah. 2 hearts join, make stronger future. Young Wolf had begun teaching some of the younger soldiers the healing song. Their accents were poor, their attempts sometimes comic, but the sound of shared laughter filled the cave. Sarah felt the white stone in her pocket, warm now with the medicine of the moment. She placed it on the wedding blanket, completing a circle that had begun long ago with 2 women who dared to imagine this day. Harrison straightened, his decision made. I'll send word to the fort. Report that the supposed hostile party was a peaceful gathering, that negotiations, he smiled slightly, of various kinds are underway. Outside, the sun had fully risen, turning the valley golden. Sarah stood with Running Cloud in the cave's entrance, watching soldiers and Kiowa begin the slow dance of becoming neighbors instead of enemies. Your mother right, that love's strongest medicine of all, Running Cloud said softly. Sarah leaned against him, feeling the rightness of their joining, like the flow of 2 rivers becoming one. Then we'll make sure that medicine spreads far and wide. The wedding blanket would see use sooner than later, but that ceremony would only formalize what was already true, that healing could bind not just wounds, but hearts. That love, in the end, was the most powerful medicine of all. 1 month later, a new structure stood at the edge of Fort Richardson's boundaries, a healing lodge built in both Kiowa and settler styles. Its door faced east, welcoming each new dawn with promise. A dawn feather hung above the entrance, blessed by both peoples, symbolizing the fresh beginning. Inside, Sarah worked alongside Swift Deer, their medicines arranged on shelves that merged both traditions. Young Wolf served as their apprentice and translator, his quick mind bridging languages as easily as he moved between cultures. Other children, both settler and Kiowa, often gathered to learn the healing ways. Captain Harrison had kept his word. Under his protection, the healing lodge became neutral ground, a place where anyone could come for help without fear. Even Sheriff Morton's wife had visited, though she came at night, seeking relief from an ailment her husband's pride wouldn't let her treat in daylight. See how they come, Grey Dove said, watching settlers and Kiowa waiting together for healing. First in darkness, then in light. Medicine does its work slowly but sure. Sarah touched the wedding blanket now hanging on the lodge's wall, its patterns telling the story of their union. Running Cloud had built them a home nearby, where they lived the joining of 2 worlds every day. Black Bear's warriors still patrolled the boundaries, but now they also helped guide settlers who had lost their way, sharing their deep knowledge of the land. Some of Harrison's soldiers had begun learning Kiowa words and customs, while Kiowa children played games they'd learned from settler families. Your mothers see this, Swift Deer said softly one evening as she and Sarah prepared medicines together. Their spirits dance with joy. Sarah looked at her mother's journal, now joined by a growing collection of new writings documenting their shared healing wisdom. Young Wolf was learning to read and write in both languages, ensuring the knowledge would pass to future generations. They saw so far ahead, Sarah agreed. Somewhere out there, other communities lived in fear and hatred, but here, in this small space between worlds, medicine had proven stronger than bullets, love more enduring than fear. The dawn feather moved gently in the evening breeze, blessing all who passed beneath it with the promise of new beginnings. In the healing lodge's doorway stands a wooden cradle, its design a blend of 2 traditions. Carved by running cloud, decorated with beadwork by grey dove, it holds Sarah and running. Cloud's newborn daughter, the first of a new generation. They named her Morning Star Rebecca, honoring both grandmothers who dared to dream of this day. Above the cradle, the dawn feather moves in the breeze, while young Wolf teaches other children the healing songs in both languages. The baby sleeps, peacefully, unaware that her very existence marks a victory over hatred and fear. In her tiny hand, she clutches the white stone from the sacred cave, a reminder that the strongest medicine flows from love.